Welcome to Sleepless Philosophers. Before the ideas begin, a small request: most of you who watch are not subscribed, and we've noticed this in the numbers, in the gap between views and the audience that stays. We post every single day, we put care into each script, each thought, each question that unfolds in the dark, and if these videos have become part of your nights, if they help you think or drift, or simply exist in that space between waking and sleep, consider subscribing, hitting the like button, turning on notifications so you know when the next one arrives. And if you feel moved to do so, leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from. What philosophical question occupies your mind the most? What idea you return to when everything else falls away? These small gestures matter more than you might think. They allow this work to continue. They allow these ideas to reach others like you, scattered across the world, awake in the quiet hours. Now the introduction ends and the philosophy begins. Attention has become currency, has become the raw material that corporations extract and refine and sell. And this transformation happened quietly, happened gradually, happened so smoothly that most people did not notice they were becoming the product, did not realize that their consciousness had been colonized, that the hours of their lives were being auctioned to the highest bidder, that every moment of awareness was being monetized by platforms designed not to inform or connect or entertain, but to harvest, to capture, to hold the gaze for as long as possible and convert that holding into profit. And the genius of this system is that it does not feel like exploitation, does not feel like theft, feels instead like choice, like freedom, like the vast menu of options that modernity provides. But the choice is curated, is algorithmically optimized, is designed to keep the user inside the platform, inside the feed, inside the cycle of stimulus and response that generates data. And the data is what matters. The data is what gets sold. The clicks and scrolls and pauses and searches that reveal preferences, reveal psychology, reveal the patterns that allow prediction. And prediction is control, is the ability to shape behavior, to nudge decisions, to make certain choices more likely than others. And this happens below the level of awareness, happens in the gap between stimulus and response, happens so quickly that by the time consciousness arrives to claim authorship of the decision has already been made, has been influenced by factors that were carefully engineered to be invisible, to operate in the blind spots of perception. And the engineers are not evil, are not villains, are just optimizing, are just doing what they are hired to do, which is maximize engagement. And engagement is measured in time, in how many minutes per day the user spends inside the system. And the system is very good at maximizing this metric, has been refined through millions of iterations, has been tested on billions of users, has discovered principles of human psychology that academic researchers never found, because researchers have ethics committees and platforms have incentives, and the incentive is to find the exact frequency of reward that keeps behavior going, the exact ratio of novelty to familiarity that prevents habituation, the exact level of difficulty that maintains interest without causing frustration, and these parameters are adjusted in real time, are personalized for each user, are tuned to the individual vulnerabilities that the data reveals. And what the data reveals is that humans are predictable, are hackable, are machines that respond to inputs in ways that can be modeled and exploited. And the exploitation is not illegal, is not even considered unethical by the standards of the industry, is just business, just capitalism, just the market finding new territory to colonize. And the territory is consciousness, is the hours of the day that used to be empty, used to be boring, used to be filled with thought or rest or staring at walls. And these empty hours were not profitable, were not monetizable, were waste from an economic perspective, and so they had to be filled, had to be captured, had to be converted into engagement. And the tools for this conversion are apps, are platforms, are devices that promise connection and deliver isolation, promise information and deliver distraction, promise empowerment and deliver addiction. And the addiction is not metaphorical, is not exaggeration, is literal, is the same neural pathways, the same dopamine dynamics, the same withdrawal symptoms that characterize substance addiction. And the platforms know this, have hired neuroscientists and psychologists to make the products more addictive, more compelling, more difficult to resist, and resistance is framed as weakness, as lack of self-control, as personal failing. But this framing obscures the asymmetry of power, obscures the fact that individuals are competing against teams of PhDs with unlimited resources and sophisticated tools. And in this competition, the individual always loses, always ends up scrolling, always ends up checking, always ends up giving the platform what it wants, which is attention. And attention is finite, is the one resource that cannot be manufactured or expanded, is strictly limited by the hours in a day and the capacity of the nervous system. And so, the competition for attention is zero-sum, is a war where every platform is fighting every other platform, and all of them are fighting against sleep and work and relationships, and anything else that might occupy consciousness. And the platforms are winning, are capturing more hours every year, are extending their reach into moments that used to be sacred, used to be protected, used to be offline. And offline is becoming a luxury, is becoming something only the wealthy can afford, because opting out requires discipline and alternatives, and the knowledge that opting out is even possible. And most people do not have this knowledge, do not see the system, do not recognize that their attention is being farmed, and even those who do recognize it often cannot escape, cannot resist, because the platforms are too useful, too convenient, too integrated into the infrastructure of modern life. And to reject them is to reject participation, to accept isolation, to make life harder in exchange for autonomy. And most choose convenience over autonomy, choose connection over sovereignty, choose the platform over the void. And the void is what waits in the absence of stimulation, is what the constant connectivity is designed to prevent, is boredom, is the experience of being alone with the unoccupied mind. And boredom has become intolerable, has become something to be avoided at all costs. And the cost is attention, is consciousness, is the capacity to think without distraction, to feel without mediation, to simply be without needing external input. And this capacity is atrophying, is declining with each generation, is being bred out by an environment that never stops demanding response, that never allows rest, that treats every moment of inactivity as opportunity, as potential engagement that must be captured. And the capturing is called user experience, is called interface design, is called growth hacking. And these terms sanitize what is happening, make it sound technical rather than predatory, make it sound like optimization rather than exploitation. But the experience of the user is not optimized for the user, is optimized for the platform, is designed to extract maximum value from minimum input. And the value extracted is not just attention, but data, not just time, but information, not just engagement, but identity, because the platforms know things about their users that the users do not know about themselves, have models of personality and preference that are more accurate than self-report. And these models are sold, are licensed, are used to manipulate. And the manipulation is called advertising, but is really behavior modification, is the application of psychological principles to make certain actions more likely. And the actions are clicking and buying and voting and believing. And what is believed is whatever the algorithm decides to show. Whatever content the model predicts will generate engagement. And engagement means time, means attention, means the user staying inside the system. And the system has learned that outrage generates engagement, that fear generates engagement, that tribalism and conflict and moral certainty generate engagement. And so these are what the algorithm promotes, what the feed becomes filled with, not because the platform wants a more divided world, but because division is profitable, keeps people scrolling, keeps people arguing, keeps attention captured. And the captured attention is sold to advertisers who want to change behavior, who want to make people buy products they do not need, believe things that are not true, vote for candidates who do not serve their interests, and the system works, is terrifyingly effective. Has changed elections, has changed culture, has changed what people think is real, and reality is becoming whatever the algorithm amplifies, whatever goes viral, whatever captures attention long enough to become part of the discourse. And the discourse is not conversation but performance, not exchange but broadcast, not thinking but reacting. And reaction is what the system wants, is faster than reflection, is more primitive, is easier to predict and manipulate. And so the environment rewards reaction, punishes reflection, makes it difficult to think slowly, to consider carefully, to withhold judgment. And the result is a population that is always responding, always reacting, always engaged but never thoughtful, never deliberate, never in control of their own attention. And attention is the foundation of everything else, is what makes learning possible, makes relationships possible, makes meaning possible. And when attention is colonized, everything built on attention becomes precarious, becomes shallow, becomes vulnerable to collapse. And the collapse is already happening, is visible in the epidemic of anxiety and depression, in the inability to focus, in the fragmentation of identity, in the sense that life is accelerating, that there is never enough time, that something important is being lost, but it is not clear what or how to get it back. And what is being lost is sovereignty, is the right to one's own consciousness, the right to choose what to pay attention to, rather than having attention hijacked, manipulated, sold. And the platforms will say that users have choice, that no one is forced to use these services, that opting out is always possible. But this is disingenuous, is like saying that people choose to breathe polluted air because they could move, could leave the city, could find somewhere clean. And technically, this is true, but practically, it ignores the structure of power, ignores that the environment has been changed in ways that make certain choices extremely costly. That opting out of the attention economy means opting out of employment, education, social connection, civic participation. And so the choice is not really a choice, is coerced by circumstance, by the fact that the platforms have become infrastructure, have become the roads on which modern life travels. And to refuse them is to refuse modernity, to accept marginalization, and most cannot afford this refusal. And so they stay, keep scrolling, keep checking, keep giving away their attention, and receiving in return the feeling of being connected, being informed, being free, when really they are isolated, distracted, captured. And the freedom is the freedom of the hamster wheel, the freedom to run without going anywhere, the freedom to choose between options that have all been curated to serve the same end, and the end is profit, is the conversion of attention into money, is the monetization of consciousness itself. And this monetization was not possible before, was not technically feasible, required technologies that did not exist, required smartphones and algorithms, and the infrastructure to track and analyze and predict behavior in real time. And now that the infrastructure exists, it will not be dismantled, will not be voluntarily abandoned, because it's too valuable, too profitable, too central to the business models of the most powerful corporations in history. And these corporations are not accountable to users, are accountable to shareholders. And shareholders care about growth, care about returns, care about the numbers going up. And the numbers go up when engagement goes up, when attention is captured more effectively, when the competition is crushed and the market is monopolized. And monopoly is what has been achieved, is what the platform economy tends toward, because platforms benefit from network effects, from being where everyone else is. And this creates winner-take-all dynamics, creates situations where one or two platforms dominate, and alternatives cannot compete, cannot offer enough value to overcome the switching costs. And so the users are locked in, are prisoners of convenience, are unable to leave without losing access to the networks that have become essential. And the platforms know this, exploit this, degrade the experience slowly, introduce features that users hate but tolerate because the alternative is worse, is disconnection, and disconnection is unthinkable, has become synonymous with isolation, has become the thing that the attention economy promises to save us from while actually delivering it. Because connection through a screen is not connection, is simulation of connection, is the appearance without the substance, is the feeling without the reality. And the reality is that real connection requires presence, requires attention that is not divided, not distracted, not mediated by an algorithm that is optimizing for something other than the relationship. And such attention is becoming rare, is becoming a gift that few can afford to give, because attention is the thing being taken, is the thing being sold, is the thing that there is never enough of, because it is always being redirected, always being pulled toward the next notification, the next update, the next thing designed to capture and hold and extract. And the extraction is invisible, feels like nothing, feels like just a moment, just a quick check, just staying informed. But the moments accumulate, the checks compound, and hours dissolve into fragmented minutes, into broken attention that cannot sustain thought, cannot maintain focus, cannot build anything that requires depth or complexity or sustained engagement. And depth is what is being lost, is what the attention economy is incompatible with, because depth requires time, requires the ability to stay with difficulty, to tolerate confusion, to sit with questions that do not have immediate answers. And the platforms cannot tolerate this, cannot allow users to sit, must keep them moving, must keep them scrolling, must keep them in the state of perpetual seeking that never finds, perpetual consuming that never satisfies. And satisfaction is the enemy, is what would cause the user to stop, to disengage, to leave the platform. And so satisfaction must be prevented, must be deferred, must be replaced with the promise of satisfaction, with the feeling that the next thing will be the thing. The next scroll will reveal something worth the time. And this promise is never fulfilled, is never intended to be fulfilled, is the mechanism that keeps the machine running, keeps the user trapped in the loop. And escape requires recognizing the loop, requires seeing the mechanism, requires understanding that the feeling of freedom is the trap, that the choice is the cage, that the attention economy is not serving the user but is using the user, is extracting value and leaving behind exhaustion, fragmentation, the sense that life is happening somewhere else, to someone else, and the screen is a window onto that other life, but never a door, never a way through, only a way to watch, to consume, to experience vicariously. And vicarious experience is not experience, is its negation, is the replacement of doing with watching, of living with scrolling, of being with performing. And performance is what the platforms demand. Demand the curation of identity, the presentation of self that is always positive, always successful, always enviable. And this performance is exhausting, is alienating, is the source of the anxiety that drives people back to the platforms looking for relief. And the platforms provide relief in the form of more content, more distraction, more opportunities to forget that the self being performed is not the self being lived, that the gap between them is growing, that authenticity is becoming impossible in an environment that punishes vulnerability and rewards spectacle. And spectacle is what the algorithm amplifies. What goes viral, what captures attention at scale, and attention at scale is what matters, is what generates revenue, is what makes certain voices loud and others silent. And the silence is not absence but erasure, is the algorithmic decision that certain content does not generate engagement, does not deserve distribution, does not align with the platform's interests, and interests are commercial, are about keeping users inside the system, and anything that might cause users to leave, to think, to question, to disconnect, is deprioritized, is hidden, is effectively censored not by decree but by code, by the automated decisions of systems that have no conception of truth or value or importance, only of engagement, And engagement is the wrong metric, is optimizing for the wrong thing, is maximizing time spent rather than time well spent. And the distinction matters because not all attention is equal. Some attention is nourishing and some is depleting. Some makes life richer and some makes it poorer. But the algorithm cannot distinguish, does not care, measures only duration and intensity. And intensity is easy to generate through outrage, through fear, through the triggering of emotions that demand response. And so the feed becomes a stream of triggers, becomes designed to provoke, to upset, to capture attention through the primitive circuits that evolved to detect threat. And these circuits are not designed for the modern world, are designed for a world where threats were physical, immediate, escapable, not abstract, permanent, global, and the mismatch creates chronic activation, creates a state of perpetual vigilance that wears down the nervous system, that depletes resources, that makes rest impossible because the threats never stop, the feed never ends, the notifications never cease, and the only way to stop them is to disconnect, to turn off, to reclaim attention. But disconnection feels dangerous, feels like missing something, feels like falling behind, and falling behind is unacceptable in a culture that valorizes productivity, that measures worth in output, that treats every moment as resource to be optimized. And optimization means elimination of waste. And waste includes rest, includes boredom, includes the empty time that used to be when consciousness could wander, could explore, could discover itself. And this discovery is what is being prevented, is what the colonization of attention makes impossible. Because to know oneself requires attention turned inward, requires time that is not filled, requires boredom. And boredom is not absence, but presence, is the mind meeting itself without distraction, without mediation, without escape. And this meeting is where insight comes from, where creativity comes from, where meaning comes from. But the platforms cannot monetize insight, cannot sell creativity, cannot profit from meaning. And so these are sacrificed, are traded for engagement, for the illusion of productivity, for the feeling of being busy that is actually being used, being exploited, being colonized. And the colonization is complete when it becomes invisible, when it feels like nature, when the user cannot imagine life without the platform, cannot remember what attention felt like before it was captured, cannot conceive of consciousness that is not mediated, not monetized, not owned by someone else. And ownership is what has been achieved, is what the attention economy has accomplished, not through force but through design, through the slow accumulation of habits that become dependencies, through the gradual adjustment of expectations until constant connectivity feels normal and solitude feels strange. And strange is threatening, is to be avoided, is what the platform protects against, promises to eliminate, and the elimination is achieved, is total, is the end of privacy, the end of interiority, the end of the self that is not performing, not producing, not consuming. And what remains is the user, the node in the network, the data point in the model, the attention that is harvested and sold and never returned. And the question is whether this is sustainable, whether consciousness can survive colonization, whether attention can be extracted indefinitely without something breaking, and the breaking is already happening, is visible in the rising rates of mental illness, in the inability to be alone, in the desperation for distraction that feels like drowning, like suffocation, like something essential has been taken and cannot be recovered. And recovery would require resistance, would require the deliberate cultivation of boredom, the intentional creation of empty time, the radical act of doing nothing in a world that demands constant doing. And doing nothing is not laziness, but rebellion, is the refusal to participate, is the reclamation of sovereignty, is the assertion that attention is not for sale, that consciousness is not a resource, that the self has value independent of productivity, independent of engagement, independent of what can be extracted. And this assertion is difficult, is countercultural, is fighting against systems that are designed to prevent it. But it is possible, is necessary, is the only way to escape the colonization, to restore attention to its proper owner, to make consciousness sovereign again. And sovereignty is not isolation, but autonomy, is the right to choose, the right to refuse, the right to be bored, to be slow, to be present. And presence is what the attention economy destroys, is what cannot be monetized, is what makes life worth living. And without it, all the engagement in the world is empty, is meaningless, is just motion, just noise, just the sound of attention being sold. Memory is not a gift, but a burden. Not the preservation of experience, but its prolongation. Not the recording of the past, but its endless present tense replay. And this replay is what makes trauma permanent, what makes suffering extend beyond its moment, what converts a single event into a lifetime of pain, because the event is not just remembered, but is relived. It is re-experienced in the body, in the nervous system, in the patterns of activation that do not distinguish between then and now, between memory and occurrence, between representation and reality. And so the past remains present, remains active, remains capable of causing suffering long after the original threat has passed, long after the danger is over, long after any adaptive function of remembering could be served. And this persistence raises the question of whether some memories should be erased, whether some experiences should be forgotten, whether the technology that is emerging that promises to selectively delete traumatic memories while leaving other memories intact should be used, should be embraced, should be offered to those whose lives are destroyed by memories. They cannot escape, cannot integrate, cannot survive, and the survival is what is at stake, is what makes the question urgent. Because some memories are incompatible with living, are producing symptoms that are unbearable, are creating suffering so severe that the person carrying the memory would choose non-existence over continued remembering. And the choices being made is visible in suicide rates, in substance abuse, in all the ways that people try to escape memories that will not let them go. And the letting go is what forgetting would provide, is what erasure would accomplish, is the liberation from the past that therapy tries to achieve, but often fails to deliver. Because therapy works with memory, works through memory, tries to integrate the traumatic experience into narrative, into meaning, into the story of the self. But some experiences resist integration, resist meaning, resist becoming part of any story except the story of horror, of violation, of the destruction of everything that makes life livable. And when integration fails, when meaning cannot be found, when the memory remains as intrusive, as overwhelming, as fragmenting as it was at the moment of encoding, then what is the ethical response? Is it to insist that the person continue carrying the memory, continue suffering from it, continue being destroyed by it? Or is it to offer erasure, to provide the technology that could remove the memory, could delete the trace, could free the person from the past? And the freedom is what erasure promises, is what makes it appealing, is what drives the development of techniques that can target specific memories, that can identify the neural patterns associated with traumatic experiences and disrupt them, prevent them from reconsolidating, make them inaccessible. And the inaccessibility is forgetting, is the functional equivalent of the memory never having been formed. And if the memory was never formed, then the trauma never happened. Not in the sense that the event did not occur, but in the sense that it is not remembered, is not present, is not continuing to shape experience. And the shaping is what memory does, is how the past influences the present. And if the influence is removed, then the past is effectively erased, is no longer part of the person's life, is no longer determining their responses, their possibilities, their sense of who they are. And the who they are is the problem, is the question that erasure raises, because If identity is constituted by memory, if the self is the narrative constructed from experiences, then what happens to identity when memories are deleted, when experiences are removed, when the continuity is broken? And the continuity is what makes the self feel stable, feel coherent, feel like the same person over time. And if memories are erased, then the person who emerges is not the same person, is someone different, is someone who did not have those experiences, who was not shaped by that trauma, who does not carry that pain. And this difference is what makes erasure controversial, is what raises the ethical question of whether it is right to change someone's identity, to make them into someone else, even if that someone else would suffer less, would function better, would have a life that is livable, because the life that is livable is not the life of the person who chose erasure, is the life of a different person, a person who is created by the deletion of memory. And creation through deletion is strange, is unsettling, is raising questions about what it means to be the same person, what continuity consists of, what identity requires, and the requirements are not clear, are disputed, are the subject of philosophical debate that has no resolution, because some theories say that identity requires psychological continuity, requires that there be a chain of memories connecting present self to past self, and if that chain is broken, if memories are deleted, then continuity is lost, identity is disrupted. The person who exists after erasure is not the same person who existed before, and this non-sameness is either a problem or a solution depending on perspective, depending on whether identity is valued more than well-being, whether continuity is more important than happiness, whether the integrity of the self matters more than the quality of experience, and the quality of experience is what suffers under traumatic memory, is what is destroyed by intrusive recollections, is what makes life unbearable for those who cannot forget. And if they cannot forget naturally, then perhaps they should be allowed to forget artificially, to choose erasure, to opt for the deletion of memories that are destroying them. And the destruction is real, is measurable, is visible in brain scans, in stress hormone levels, in all the biomarkers of chronic suffering. And the suffering is not ennobling, is not making people stronger, is not serving any purpose except to demonstrate that memory can be prison, can be torture, can be the mechanism through which the past destroys the present, and the destruction is what erasure would prevent, is what deletion would stop, is what forgetting would accomplish. And the accomplishing is mercy, is compassion, is the recognition that some memories are too heavy to carry, are too painful to bear, are incompatible with survival, and survival is what matters, is what should be prioritized, is what justifies intervention, justifies technology, justifies the manipulation of memory that would once have been considered impossible, unthinkable, unethical, but is now possible, is now real, is now raising questions that must be answered, about who decides, about what criteria are used, about whether erasure should be available to anyone who wants it, or only to those whose suffering meets some threshold. And the threshold is where the difficulty lies, is where the ethics become complicated, because if erasure is available only for the most severe trauma, then who decides what counts as severe enough? And if it is available to anyone, then what prevents its misuse? What prevents people from erasing memories that are uncomfortable but not traumatic, that are painful but not disabling, that are part of the normal range of human experience and should perhaps be integrated rather than deleted? And the integration is what traditional approaches emphasize, is what therapy aims for, is the incorporation of difficult experiences into a coherent narrative, into a sense of self that includes the trauma but is not defined by it. But this incorporation is not always possible, is not always achievable, is requiring resources and time and capacity that not everyone has. And even when it is achieved, it is not always sufficient, is not always eliminating the suffering, is not always making the memory tolerable. And when integration fails, then what? is the person simply condemned to suffer, condemned to carry the memory forever, condemned to be destroyed by an experience that happened once but is replaying endlessly. And the endless is what memory makes possible, is the way that a single event can become a lifetime of suffering. And if that suffering can be prevented, can be eliminated, can be stopped through the deletion of memory, then why should it not be? What principle is more important than the relief of suffering? What value trumps the well-being of the person who is being destroyed by memory? And the destruction is not metaphorical, is literal, is the disintegration of functioning, of relationships, of the capacity to live. And if erasure can prevent this disintegration, then perhaps it should be used. Perhaps it should be offered. Perhaps it should be normalized rather than stigmatized. But the stigma is real, is coming from multiple directions, from those who believe that memory is essential to identity and should not be tampered with, from those who worry about slippery slopes and unintended consequences, from those who insist that suffering has meaning and should be endured rather than erased. And the meaning is what is most disputed, is what is most questioned. Because the claim that suffering has meaning is easy to make from a position of safety, from a position of not suffering, from a position of having integrated one's own traumas, or never having experienced trauma severe enough to be unintegrable. But for those who are suffering, for those who are being destroyed, the meaning is not visible, is not accessible, is not providing any comfort or purpose or reason to continue. And the continue is what is in question, is what is at stake, is why erasure might be necessary, might be ethical, might be the right choice. Despite all the concerns about identity and continuity and the sanctity of memory, because memory is not sacred, is not inherently valuable, is only valuable insofar as it serves life. And when it does not serve life, when it destroys life, when it makes life unbearable, then its value is negative, is harmful, is justifying intervention. And intervention is what erasure is the technological manipulation of memory for therapeutic purposes. And the therapeutic is what justifies it, is what makes it ethical, is the goal of reducing suffering, of improving functioning, of making life livable for those for whom it is currently unlivable. And the unlivable is the condition that justifies extreme measures, that justifies technologies that would otherwise be considered too risky, too invasive, too potentially harmful, because the harm of doing nothing is greater than the harm of erasure, is greater than the risk of identity disruption, is greater than any abstract concern about the sanctity of memory. And the sanctity is the appeal to tradition, is the insistence that things should be done the way they have always been done, that memory should not be manipulated, that the past should be accepted rather than edited. But this traditionalism is not serving those who are suffering, is not helping those who are being destroyed, is only protecting an ideal, a concept, a belief that memory is essential to being human. And maybe it is, maybe memory is what makes humans human, but maybe humans would be better off with less memory, with more forgetting, with the capacity to let go of experiences that serve no purpose except to create suffering. And the capacity is what technology is providing, is what erasure makes possible, is the choice to forget, to let go, to be free from the past. And the freedom is what matters, is what should be prioritized, is what makes erasure not just permissible, but perhaps obligatory, perhaps something that should be offered, should be encouraged, should be made available to all who need it, because the need is great, is widespread, is affecting millions who are living with memories they cannot escape, cannot integrate, cannot survive. And the survival is what is at stake, is what makes this an urgent question. Not an abstract philosophical puzzle, but a practical, ethical dilemma with real consequences for real people who are suffering now, who need relief now, who cannot wait for therapy to work or for time to heal or for meaning to emerge from their trauma. Because for many, the meaning never emerges. The healing never happens. The suffering never ends, except through death or erasure. And if erasure can prevent death, then it is the ethical choice, is the compassionate choice, is the choice that prioritizes the person over the principle, the individual over the ideal, the actual suffering over the abstract concern. And the concern about identity is legitimate, is real, is raising important questions about what continuity means and whether it can be preserved through erasure. But these questions are secondary to the question of survival, are less urgent than the question of whether the person can continue living with the memory. And if they cannot, then the questions about identity become moot, become irrelevant, because identity requires existence, and existence requires tolerability, and tolerability requires that memory not be destroying the person. And if it is destroying the person, then erasure is justified, is necessary, is the intervention that should be used. And the using is not a failure of courage or resilience or meaning-making, is not an admission of weakness, is not a refusal to integrate or endure, is simply the recognition that some experiences are too much, are beyond what can be borne, are incompatible with living. And when living is the goal, then erasure is the means, is the technology that makes it possible, is the mercy that medicine can provide, and the providing is ethics, is compassion, is the appropriate response to suffering that is otherwise unrelievable. And the unrelievable is what makes memory torture in some cases, is what makes the past a prison, is what makes forgetting not a failure, but a necessity, not a loss, but a gain, not the destruction of identity, but its salvation, because identity requires a living person, and living requires that trauma not be replaying constantly, not be fragmenting consciousness, not be making every moment unbearable. And the unbearable is what memory makes possible, is what remembering produces, is the cost of consciousness that includes memory. And maybe some things should not be remembered, should not be preserved, should not be allowed to continue shaping experience. And the shaping is what memory does, is how the past influences the present. And if that influence is destructive, then it should be stopped, should be interrupted, should be erased. And the erasing is what technology now allows, is what ethics should permit, is what compassion demands. Because the alternative is continued suffering, is the ongoing destruction of people by their own memories, is the insistence that they carry burdens that no one should have to carry, that serve no purpose, that make no meaning, that produce only pain, and the pain is enough, is sufficient reason to intervene, is justification for erasure, for deletion, for the right to forget, for the mercy of amnesia, for the liberation from memory that is prison, that is torture. That is the mechanism through which trauma becomes permanent. And the permanent is what should be ended, is what technology can end, is what ethics should permit ending. Because memory is not sacred, identity is not absolute, continuity is not more important than survival, and survival is what erasure makes possible, is what forgetting provides, is what some people need in order to live. And the living is what matters, is what should be protected, is what justifies the technology, justifies the intervention, justifies the choice to erase, to forget, to let go of the past, to be freed from memory, to be given the mercy of amnesia. And the mercy is real, is powerful, is the gift of forgetting what should never have happened, what should never have been remembered, what should never have been allowed to destroy a life. And the destruction is what erasure prevents, is what forgetting stops, is what makes the ethics clear, makes the choice obvious, makes the answer yes. Some memories should be erased, should be deleted, should be forgotten, because memory is not always gift, is sometimes curse, is sometimes the thing that destroys rather than preserves, that harms rather than helps, that makes life unbearable rather than meaningful. And when memory is cursed, then erasure is cure, is treatment, is the ethical response to suffering that has no other solution. And the solution is forgetting, is amnesia, is the right to oblivion, is the choice to let the past go, to be freed from its weight, to live without the burden of memories that serve no purpose except to create pain. And the pain is enough, is reason enough, is justification enough for erasure, for deletion, for the technology that makes forgetting possible, that makes mercy achievable, that makes liberation from memory real, and the real is what matters, is what should guide ethics, is what should determine whether erasure is used, and the determination is clear, is obvious, is yes, for those who need it, for those who are suffering, for those whose memories are destroying them. Erasure should be available, should be offered, should be used, because memory is not sacred, suffering is not meaningful. The past is not worth preserving when it destroys the present, and the present is all there is all that matters, is what should be protected, even if protection requires forgetting, even if survival requires erasure, even if living requires the deletion of memory, because living is what matters, is what ethics serves, is what makes erasure not just permissible, but necessary, not just acceptable, but obligatory, not just an option, but the right choice, the ethical choice, the compassionate choice, the choice that prioritizes people over principles, individuals over ideals, actual lives over abstract concerns. And the concerns are real, but are secondary, are less important than the suffering, less urgent than the need, less compelling than the possibility of relief. And the relief is what erasure provides, is what forgetting offers, is what amnesia delivers, and the delivery is mercy, is compassion, is ethics in action, is the appropriate response to suffering that can be prevented, to pain that can be stopped, to memories that can be erased, and should be erased, and will be erased, because the technology exists, because the need is real, because the suffering is unbearable, and the unbearable should not be borne when it can be lifted, when it can be removed, when it can be erased. And the erasing is not loss but gain, not harm but healing, not destruction but salvation, not the end of identity but its continuation. Because identity requires life, and life requires that memory not be weapon, not be prison, not be torture. And when memory is these things, then erasure is the answer, is the solution, is the mercy that makes. Living possible, and the possible, is what matters, is what ethics serves, is what makes forgetting not failure, but wisdom, not weakness, but strength, not escape, but survival. And survival is enough, is sufficient, is the justification for erasure, for deletion, for the right to forget, for the mercy of amnesia, for the ethics of forgetting. Privacy might be accident, might be the result of biological shielding, rather than fundamental law, might be the consequence of frequencies that consciousness operates on being inaccessible to ordinary perception, but not inaccessible in principle, not impossible to detect, not inherently private, but only contingently private, only hidden because the mechanisms for detection have not evolved, have not been developed, have not been made accessible to awareness, and the awareness that some claim to have, that schizophrenics report, that people experiencing psychosis describe, might not be delusion, but might be the temporary or permanent loss of the shielding, the opening of the channels that are normally closed, the reception of signals that are normally filtered out, and the filtering is what protects privacy, is what keeps thoughts hidden, is what ensures that consciousness remains internal, but the internal might not be as secure as it seems, might not be as absolute as is assumed, might be vulnerable to detection, to interception, to the kind of broadcasting that paranoid individuals fear, and that psychiatric diagnosis dismisses as impossible, as symptom, as the misattribution of internal events to external sources. But what if the misattribution is correct? What if the internal events are external? What if thoughts are not confined to the skull, but are radiating outward on frequencies that some can detect, that some are sensitive to, that some cannot avoid detecting, and the detecting is experienced as hearing voices, as receiving transmissions, as being unable to stop the influx of thoughts that are not one's own, but are coming from others, from the environment, from the field of consciousness that might be shared rather than private, that might be collective rather than individual, that might be accessible to those whose shielding has failed, whose filters have broken, whose sensitivity has increased beyond the normal range. And the normal range is what most people experience, is the condition where thoughts feel private, feel internal, feel like they belong to the self and are not accessible to others. But this feeling might be illusion, might be the result of limited sensitivity, might be the consequence of biological constraints that prevent the detection of signals that are actually present, actually broadcasting, actually available to anyone with the right equipment, the right sensitivity, the right frequency. And the frequency is what matters, is what determines whether thoughts are visible or invisible, whether consciousness is private or public, whether the mind is sealed or permeable. And the permeable is what some experience, is what schizophrenics describe, is what people in psychosis report. And the reports are consistent, are describing the same phenomena across cultures, across time periods, across individuals who have no contact with each other. And the consistency is troubling, is suggesting that maybe the experiences are not entirely subjective, are not entirely generated by malfunctioning brains, but are detecting something real, something that is normally filtered out, something that exists in the environment, in the field, in the frequencies where consciousness operates. And the operating might be electromagnetic, might be quantum, might be something that physics has not yet characterized, but that biology is sensitive to, that nervous systems are tuned to, that brains are receiving and transmitting constantly. And the transmitting is what creates the possibility of thought broadcasting, is what makes privacy contingent rather than absolute, is what suggests that the experience of having thoughts that are one's own, that are hidden from others, that are safe from detection, might be the result of anatomical luck, might be the consequence of having filters that work, having shielding that holds, having a nervous system that is tuned to the right frequency and is not picking up the signals that are all around, that are being broadcast by every other conscious being, and the beings are transmitting without knowing, are radiating thoughts without intending, are creating a field of consciousness that is dense, that is crowded, that is full of signals that most cannot detect, but that some can, that some are cursed to detect, that some experience as invasion, as the loss of privacy, as the horrifying realization that thoughts are not safe, are not hidden, are not private, and the not private is what thought broadcasting delusion describes, is what paranoia is responding to, is what might be accurate perception rather than misperception, might be the detection of real signals rather than the hallucination of imaginary ones. And the imaginary is what psychiatry assumes, is what diagnosis requires, is the framework that treats all claims of thought broadcasting as symptoms of disorder, as evidence of psychosis, as the malfunctioning of the reality testing apparatus. But reality testing assumes knowledge of what reality is, assumes that the normal experience is the accurate experience, assumes that privacy is real, and that any perception of its violation is false. And the false might be the assumption, might be the belief that thoughts are private, might be the conviction that consciousness is sealed, when really consciousness is leaking, is broadcasting, is detectable to those who have the sensitivity. And the sensitivity is what varies, is what creates the spectrum, is what makes some people receivers and others transmitters, and most people neither. Most people shielded, most people operating on frequencies that do not overlap with others, that do not allow detection, that maintain the illusion of privacy. And the illusion is functional, is necessary, is what makes social life possible, because if everyone could detect everyone else's thoughts, then interaction would be impossible, would be overwhelming, would be the constant influx of signals that would drown out the ability to think, to focus, to maintain the sense of being an individual consciousness. And the individual is what privacy creates, is what shielding allows, is what makes the experience of being a separate self possible. And the separate might be illusion, might be the result of limited perception, might be what happens when the field of consciousness is filtered down to the signals that originate in one body, in one nervous system, in one brain. And the brain is creating the illusion of separation by filtering out everything else, by attending only to internal signals, by ignoring or suppressing the external signals that are always present, always available, always broadcasting. And the broadcasting is what some cannot ignore, cannot suppress, cannot filter out. And these are the ones who experience thought broadcasting, who hear voices, who feel that their privacy has been violated, and the violation might be real, might be the accurate perception that thoughts are not private, that consciousness is not sealed, that the mind is permeable to signals from the environment, from other minds, from the field that connects all consciousness. And the connecting is what thought broadcasting implies, is what the delusion is pointing toward, is the possibility that minds are not isolated but are networked, are not separate but are overlapping, are not private but are accessible to each other on frequencies that most cannot detect. And the detection is what would make privacy impossible, would make thought visible, would make consciousness public. And the public is what some are experiencing, is what some are reporting, is what psychiatry is dismissing as impossible, as symptom, as the product of malfunctioning brains. But what if the brains are not malfunctioning, but are functioning too well, are too sensitive, are detecting signals that are real, but are normally filtered out? And the filtering is what fails in psychosis, is what breaks in schizophrenia, is what allows the influx of thoughts that are not one's own, that are coming from others, that are being broadcast on frequencies that are normally inaccessible. And the inaccessible is what protects privacy, is what makes thoughts feel safe, is what creates the illusion that the mind is sealed, is private, is hidden from others. And the hidden might be temporary, might be contingent, might be the result of biological constraints that could be overcome, could be bypassed, could be eliminated through technology, through drugs, through practices that alter consciousness, that change sensitivity, that open the channels that are normally closed. And the opening is what some experience spontaneously, is what happens in psychosis, is what occurs when the filters fail. And the failing might not be pathological, but might be the revealing of a truth that is normally hidden, that is normally suppressed, that is incompatible with social functioning, but is accurate, is real, is showing that thoughts are not private, that consciousness is not individual, that the mind is part of a field that is shared, that is collective, that is accessible to anyone who has the sensitivity. And the sensitivity is what varies, is what creates the spectrum, is what determines whether thoughts are experienced as private or as public, as hidden or as visible, as safe or as vulnerable. And the vulnerable is what thought broadcasting feels like, is what the experience is the sense that privacy has been lost, that thoughts are exposed, that the mind is transparent to others. And the transparency might be real, might be accurate, might be the perception of a frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is no longer hidden, where the illusion of privacy dissolves, and the dissolving is terrifying, is overwhelming, is experienced as invasion, as violation, as the loss of the boundary that makes the self feel separate, feel protected, feel safe. And the safety is what privacy provides, is what shielding creates, is what most people have and some people lack. And the lacking is what makes thought broadcasting possible, is what opens the channels, is what allows detection. And the detection is not imagined, but is real, is accurate, is perceiving signals that are present, that are broadcasting, that are coming from other minds. And the other minds are not aware that they are broadcasting, are not intending to transmit, are not trying to communicate, are just existing, just thinking, just being conscious. And the consciousness is radiating, is emitting signals, is creating a field that some can detect, that some are sensitive to, that some experience as voices, as thoughts that are not their own, as the influx of consciousness from outside, and the outside is everywhere, is surrounding, is the environment of minds that are all broadcasting, all transmitting, all creating signals that are normally filtered out, but that some can detect. And the detecting is what schizophrenics are doing, is what people in psychosis are experiencing, is what thought broadcasting is. And the broadcasting is real, is not delusion, is not symptom, is the accurate perception of a frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is detectable, where privacy is lost. And the lost is what some experience, is what some report, is what psychiatry dismisses. But the dismissing might be wrong, might be the refusal to acknowledge a truth that is too disturbing, too threatening, too incompatible with the belief that thoughts are private, that minds are sealed, that consciousness is individual, and the individual might be illusion, might be the result of shielding, might be what most people experience because their filters work, because their sensitivity is limited, because they are operating on frequencies that do not overlap with others, and the others are there, are broadcasting, are detectable to those who have the sensitivity. And the sensitivity is what the Soviets were researching, is what psychic warfare experiments were trying to exploit, is what programs like M-Culture were investigating, is the possibility that thoughts can be detected, can be influenced, can be transmitted and received. And the receiving is what some can do naturally, is what schizophrenics are experiencing, is what thought broadcasting is describing, and the describing is accurate, is real, is perceiving signals that are present, that are broadcasting on frequencies that are normally inaccessible. And the inaccessible is what protects most people, is what maintains privacy, is what creates the illusion that thoughts are hidden, are safe, are private, but the private is contingent, is anatomical, is the result of luck, of having the right sensitivity, the right filters, the right shielding, and the shielding can fail, can break, can be bypassed, and the bypassing is what reveals the truth, which is that thoughts are not private, consciousness is not sealed, minds are not isolated, and the isolation is illusion, is the result of limited perception, is what happens when the frequencies where consciousness operates are filtered out, are suppressed, are made inaccessible, and the inaccessible is temporary, is contingent, is what most people experience, but not what everyone experiences. And the everyone includes those who can detect the signals, who can perceive the thoughts, who can see consciousness at the frequency where it becomes visible, where privacy dissolves, where the mind is exposed. And the exposed is what thought broadcasting is what the experience describes, is what some are perceiving, and the perceiving might be accurate, might be real, might be showing that privacy is not fundamental, but is contingent, is not absolute, but is anatomical, is not guaranteed, but is the result of luck, of having filters that work, of operating on frequencies that do not overlap, of being shielded from the signals that are everywhere, that are broadcasting, that are making thoughts visible to those who can detect them. And the detecting is possible, is real, is what some experience, is what thought broadcasting is. And the broadcasting is not delusion, but is perception, is not symptom, but is sensitivity, is not pathology, but is the revealing of a truth that most cannot see, that most are protected from, that most never experience, which is that thoughts are visible, consciousness is detectable, minds are permeable, and privacy is not inherent, but is anatomical luck, is the contingent result of having the right biology, the right sensitivity, the right shielding, and the shielding is what fails, is what breaks, is what allows the frequency where thoughts become visible to be detected, to be experienced, to be known. And the knowing is terrifying, is overwhelming, is the loss of the illusion that made privacy possible, that made the self feel separate, that made consciousness feel safe. And the safety is gone, is lost, is revealed to be illusion, is shown to be contingent, is exposed as anatomical luck, and the luck is what most have, is what protects most people, is what maintains the belief that thoughts are private. But the private is not absolute, is not guaranteed, is not fundamental, is only the result of frequencies being filtered, being suppressed, being made inaccessible, and the inaccessible can become accessible, can be detected, can be experienced, and the experiencing is what thought broadcasting is what schizophrenics report, is what psychosis reveals, which is that privacy is not inherent, consciousness is not sealed, thoughts are not hidden, and the hidden is illusion, is the result of shielding, is the contingent outcome of anatomical luck, and the luck can fail, can run out, can be lost, and the losing is what reveals the truth, which is that thoughts are visible, minds are permeable, consciousness is detectable at the frequency where it becomes visible, where privacy dissolves, where the illusion ends, and the ending is what some experience, is what thought broadcasting is the perception of the frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is exposed, where privacy is revealed to be not fundamental but contingent, not absolute but anatomical, not guaranteed but luck. And the luck is what protects most, is what fails for some, is what reveals the truth that thoughts are broadcasting, are visible, are detectable, and the detecting is real, is accurate, is not delusion but perception, is not symptom but sensitivity, is not pathology but truth, is the frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is no longer private, where the mind is exposed and the exposure is what thought broadcasting is what some experience, is what reveals that privacy is anatomical luck, is contingent, is not absolute, is not fundamental, is only the result of filtering, of shielding, of operating on frequencies that do not overlap. And the overlapping is what happens when the filters fail, when the shielding breaks, when the frequency becomes accessible. And the accessible is what some perceive, is what thought broadcasting is the visibility of thoughts, the detectability of consciousness, the permeability of mind, and the permeability is real, is accurate, is the truth that privacy is not inherent but is luck, is not absolute but is anatomical, is not guaranteed but is contingent, and the contingent can fail, can end, can reveal the frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is exposed, where privacy is lost, and the lost is what some experience, is what thought broadcasting is the truth that minds are permeable, that thoughts are visible, that consciousness operates on frequencies that some can detect, and the detecting is not delusion, is not symptom, is not pathology, is perception, is sensitivity, is the revealing of truth, is the frequency where thoughts become visible, where privacy ends, where the illusion dissolves, and the dissolving is what thought broadcasting is what some experience, is what reveals that privacy is anatomical luck, and luck can fail, and the failing reveals the truth, which is that thoughts are visible, consciousness is detectable, minds are permeable, and privacy is not fundamental, is not absolute, is not guaranteed, is only luck, is only shielding, is only the filtering of frequencies where thoughts become visible, and the visible is what some perceive, is what thought broadcasting is the truth that privacy is contingent, is anatomical, is luck. Power does not distribute evenly, does not spread across populations in equal measure, does not settle into equilibrium where everyone has the same, but instead concentrates, accumulates, forms gradients that are steep, that create hierarchies that are natural, not in the sense of being just, but in the sense of being inevitable, being the default pattern that emerges whenever humans organize, whenever groups form, whenever coordination is needed. And the need for coordination is constant, is the condition of social existence, and coordination requires decision-making, requires that someone decides when decisions cannot be made collectively, when consensus is impossible, when speed is necessary, and the necessity creates the opening for power, creates the opportunity for some to decide for others, and the deciding is power, is the core of it, is the ability to shape outcomes, to determine directions, to control resources, and once this ability concentrates, once some have it more than others, the concentration tends to increase, tends to amplify, tends to create the hierarchies that are visible in every society, every organization, every group that persists over time because power reproduces power, is self-reinforcing, is creating the conditions that allow more power to accumulate, and the accumulation is not accidental, is not the result of conspiracy, is the natural geometry of social organization, is the shape that power takes when humans interact over time, and the shape is pyramidal, is hierarchical, is arranging people into levels, into ranks, into positions that vary in their access to resources, to decision-making, to influence, and the variation is not small, is not modest, is extreme, is exponential, is creating gaps between levels that are wider than the gaps within levels. And the widest gap is at the top, is between those who have power and those who do not. And those who have power are few, are the minority, are the elite who sit at the apex of the hierarchy. And the apex is narrow, is limited, is only accommodating a small number, because power shared is power diluted, is power threatened, is power that might be challenged, and so those at the top work to maintain their position, work to prevent others from ascending, work to ensure that the hierarchy remains steep, remains stable, remains resistant to change, and the resistance is not passive, is active, is the exercise of power to preserve power, is the use of resources to maintain access to resources, is the employment of influence to prevent the emergence of rival influences, and the employment is continuous, is strategic, is operating at multiple levels, through multiple mechanisms, through the formal and the informal, through the visible and the invisible, through the structures that are explicit and the processes that are hidden, and the hidden is where power is most effective, is where it operates without being seen, without being named, without being recognized as power, because power that is visible is power that can be challenged, that can be resisted, that can be opposed, but power that is invisible, that operates through assumptions, through norms, through the structures that are taken for granted, is power that is unassailable, is power that reproduces itself without anyone noticing, without anyone objecting, without anyone having the language to describe what is happening. And what is happening is the maintenance of hierarchy through the 1,000 small mechanisms that ensure power stays where it is, that prevent redistribution, that make equality impossible, not just difficult, but structurally impossible, because the system is designed to concentrate power, is organized to funnel resources upward, is arranged to ensure that those at the top remain at the top, and the remaining is not guaranteed by force alone, is not maintained through violence alone, though violence is always available, is always in the background, is the ultimate guarantee of hierarchy. But most of the time force is not needed, is not employed because power has more subtle tools, has mechanisms that operate through consent, through the willing participation of those who are dominated. And the willing is not coerced in the obvious sense, is not forced at gunpoint, is produced through ideology, through the stories that are told about why hierarchy is natural, is necessary, is beneficial. And the beneficial is what those at the top claim, is what they teach, is what they convince others to believe, that hierarchy serves everyone, that power at the top creates order that protects those below, that inequality is the price of stability, of prosperity, of progress, and progress is the mythology that justifies hierarchy, that makes inequality seem temporary, that makes power seem earned, that makes the concentration seem like the result of merit rather than of position. And position is what matters, is what determines outcomes, is what makes some people powerful and others powerless. But the position is inherited, is transmitted, is maintained across generations through the mechanisms that convert power into wealth and wealth into power. And the conversion is seamless, is automatic, is the way that hierarchy perpetuates itself, that ensures that the children of the powerful are powerful, that the descendants of the elite remain elite, that the system reproduces itself. And the reproduction is not perfect, is not total. There is some mobility, some movement between levels, some stories of ascent that serve to legitimate the system, that create the illusion of meritocracy, that make it seem as though anyone can rise, but the rising is rare, is exceptional, is the exception that proves the rule. And the rule is that power stays where it is, that hierarchy is stable, that the geometry is fixed, and the fixing is not natural in the sense of being inevitable by physics, but is natural in the sense of emerging from the logic of organization, from the mathematics of networks, from the dynamics of accumulation, because power is not zero-sum in the short term, can grow, can expand, can create more power, but in the long term, in the context of limited resources, of finite opportunities, of scarce positions, power is rivalrous, is competed for, is gained by some at the expense of others. And the gaining is easier for those who already have power, is easier from positions of advantage, is following the principle that Matthew identified, that to those who have more will be given, and from those who have little, even what they have will be taken, and the taking is not theft, is not crime, is the normal operation of systems that concentrate power, that funnel resources upward, that ensure that advantage compounds, that success breeds success, that power accumulates and the accumulation is exponential, is accelerating, is creating gaps that widen over time, that make the top more distant from the bottom, that make mobility less possible, that make hierarchy more rigid, more entrenched, more resistant to change. And the resistance is structural, is built into the geometry, is not requiring conspiracy, not requiring explicit coordination, is just the natural result of power protecting itself, of those at the top using their position to maintain their position. And the maintenance is not cynical, is not experienced as exploitation, is justified through ideologies that explain why hierarchy is good, why power deserves to be concentrated, why inequality is natural. And natural is the word that does the work, is the justification, is the claim that hierarchy is not created by humans, but is discovered in nature, is visible in animals, in the dominance hierarchies that primates form, that wolves form, that even chickens form, and the forming is instinctive, is biological, is the way that evolution has shaped social species. And if it is natural, then it is not unjust, is not wrong, is simply the way things are, and the way things are is the most powerful justification, is the argument that requires no argument, is the appeal to inevitability, to necessity, to the claim that hierarchy cannot be otherwise. And the cannot is false, is ideological, is the masking of choice as fate, is the presentation of arrangement as nature. Because hierarchies are arrangements, are geometries that are created, that are maintained, that are enforced, and the enforcement is continuous, is requiring effort, is revealing that the naturalness is myth, is story, is the cover for power, for the exercise of domination, for the structuring of society in ways that benefit the top at the expense of the bottom. And the bottom is where most people are, is the base of the pyramid, is the many who support the few, who generate the resources that are concentrated at the apex, who do the work that creates the wealth that flows upward. And the flowing is not natural, but is designed, is structured through laws, through institutions, through the mechanisms that extract value from the many and deliver it to the few. And the delivery is called profit, is called return, is called the reward for capital, for ownership, for the position of controlling resources. And control is power, is the core of it, is the ability to decide how resources are used, who benefits, who is excluded, and the exclusion is the mechanism, is how hierarchy maintains itself, is how power reproduces power, because access is limited, is restricted, is controlled by those who already have access. And access to what? To opportunities, to resources, to the positions that confer power. And the conferring is not automatic, is not open, is requiring credentials, requiring connections, requiring the social capital that comes from position. And position is inherited, is transmitted, is the thing that makes hierarchy stable, that prevents mobility, that ensures that the geometry remains fixed. And the fixed is what those at the top want, is what they work to maintain, is what they defend through the mechanisms that are both overt and covert, that operate through law and through culture, through institutions and through norms, through the structures that are formal and the processes that are informal. And the informal is where much of the work happens, is where power operates most effectively, through networks, through relationships, through the soft power that is harder to see, harder to challenge, harder to dismantle than the hard power of force, of law, of explicit command, because soft power operates through influence, through persuasion, through the shaping of desires and beliefs, through the creation of consent. And consent is what makes hierarchy stable, is what allows domination without constant coercion, is what Gramsci called hegemony, is the condition where the dominated accept their domination, where the powerless believe in the legitimacy of power, where the hierarchy seems natural, seems right, seems like the way things should be, and the should is the achievement, is the conversion of power into authority, of domination into legitimacy, of hierarchy into order. And order is what power promises, is what it delivers, is the stability that comes from everyone knowing their place, accepting their rank, performing their role. And the performing is not resisted, because resistance seems pointless, seems impossible, seems like challenging nature itself. And nature is the mask, is the story, is the ideology that makes power invisible, that makes hierarchy seem inevitable, that makes inequality seem like the necessary cost of civilization. And civilization is the achievement of hierarchy, is the organization of humans into structures that are complex, that are specialized, that are requiring coordination. And coordination is impossible without power, without hierarchy, without someone deciding, someone directing, someone controlling. And the controlling is concentrated, is centralized, is accumulating at the top. And the top is where decisions are made, where resources are allocated, where the direction is set. And the setting is not democratic, is not collective, is not reflecting the will of the many, but is reflecting the interests of the few, of those who have power, of those who sit at the apex. And the apex is maintained through the geometry, through the structure that ensures power flows upward, that resources concentrate, that advantage compounds. And the compounding is what makes hierarchy self-perpetuating, is what makes power stable, is what prevents the redistribution that would create equality. And equality is unstable, is impossible to maintain, is the condition that immediately begins to dissolve once it is achieved. Because humans are not equal in ability, in effort, in ambition. And these differences, even small differences, compound over time, create advantages, create positions, create the beginnings of hierarchy. And once hierarchy begins, it accelerates, it amplifies, it creates the geometry that is inevitable. That is natural, not because it is good, but because it is the pattern that emerges from the mathematics of accumulation, from the logic of networks, from the dynamics of power. And power, seeks to grow, seeks to concentrate. And the concentration is resisted, is challenged, is fought against by those who are excluded, by those who are dominated, by those who suffer under hierarchy. But the resistance is difficult, is requiring coordination, is requiring resources, is requiring power. And power is what the powerless lack, is what they're excluded from. is what makes resistance so difficult, so costly, so often unsuccessful. And the unsuccessful is what history shows, is what the record demonstrates, is the pattern of hierarchies rising and falling, but never disappearing, never being replaced by equality, only being replaced by new hierarchies, by new elites, by new concentrations of power that reproduce the geometry, that maintain the structure, that ensure that power remains concentrated, that hierarchy remains the default, remains the pattern, remains the inevitable outcome of human organization. And the organization is what creates power, is what makes hierarchy necessary, or seems to make it necessary. Because organization requires coordination, and coordination requires decision-making, and decision-making requires power. And power is what? Some have and others do not. And those who have it work to keep it, work to grow it, work to pass it on. And the passing on is inheritance, is the mechanism of reproduction, is what makes hierarchy stable across time. And the stability is what those at the top value, is what they work to maintain, is what they defend against challenges, against redistribution, against the equality that would threaten their position. And the position is everything, is what determines outcomes, is what makes life easy or hard, is what provides access or denies it, is what confers power or withholds it. And the withholding is structural, is built into the geometry, is the way that hierarchy maintains itself, is the iron law that Michael's identified, is the principle that all organizations, even those founded on egalitarian principles, eventually develop hierarchies, eventually concentrate power, eventually create oligarchies, because organization requires leadership, and leadership becomes power, and power becomes self-perpetuating, becomes the thing that shapes the organization to serve the leaders rather than the members. And the members are the many, are the base, are those who do the work but do not make the decisions, do not control the resources, do not have the power, and the power is what accumulates at the top, is what defines the apex, is what makes hierarchy hierarchical, and the hierarchical is the geometry, is the structure, is the arrangement that is not accidental, is not temporary, is not the result of bad actors or flawed systems, but is the natural pattern, the inevitable outcome, the shape that power takes when humans organize, when groups form, when societies persist, and the persistence is what makes hierarchy visible, is what reveals the geometry, is what shows that power does not distribute evenly, does not create equality, does not settle into balance, but instead concentrates, accumulates, forms the pyramids that are visible everywhere, in every society, in every organization, in every context where humans coordinate, and the coordination requires hierarchy, or seems to require it, and the seeming is enough, is what makes it real, is what makes the geometry inevitable, is what ensures that power will concentrate, that inequality will persist, that hierarchy will remain the default pattern, the natural arrangement, the geometry of power that shapes human life, that determines outcomes, that creates the world where some have much and most have little, where some decide and most obey, where some rule and most are ruled, and the ruling is not eternal, is not permanent. Hierarchies fall, are replaced, are overturned, but they are not eliminated, are not abolished, are not transcended, because the geometry remains, the pattern persists, the structure reasserts itself, and new hierarchies form, new elites emerge, new concentrations of power accumulate at new apexes, and the cycle continues. The pattern repeats, the geometry remains. Because power concentrates, because hierarchy is natural, because equality is unstable, because the geometry of power is not optional, is not chosen, is not the result of conspiracy or design, but is the inevitable outcome, the natural pattern, the way that power arranges itself when humans organize, and the organizing never stops, and the hierarchy never ends, and the geometry persists, always, inevitably, naturally, as the shape of power, as the structure of domination, as the pattern that defines human society, that creates inequality, that maintains hierarchy, that ensures that power remains concentrated, that the few rule the many, that the apex dominates the base, that the geometry of power remains fixed, remains stable, remains the eternal pattern, the natural arrangement, the inevitable structure that is hierarchy, that is power. That is the way things are and have always been and will always be, as long as humans organise, as long as groups form, as long as power exists, and power always exists, always concentrates, always creates the geometry that is hierarchy, that is domination, that is the natural, inevitable, inescapable pattern of human organisation, and the organisation is power, and power is hierarchy, and hierarchy is geometry, and the geometry is eternal. Meaning was not invented but was given, was not constructed but was inherited, was not the product of individual reflection but was the air that was breathed, the framework that was absorbed, the structure that made sense of suffering, of labour, of death, of everything that otherwise would be unbearable. And this given meaning came from stories, from gods, from hierarchies that extended beyond the human into the cosmic, into realms where purposes were assigned, where roles were fixed, where every life, no matter how small, had significance, because it was part of a larger pattern, a divine plan, a cosmic order that justified suffering, that explained inequality, that made death not an end, but a transition, and the transition was to something, was leading somewhere, was part of a narrative that continued beyond the visible, beyond the mortal, beyond the contingent facts of this world, into eternal truths that grounded everything. And the grounding is what modernity has lost, is what the Enlightenment destroyed, is what science dissolved by showing that the cosmic order was projection, was fiction, was the human need for meaning imposed onto a universe that has no meaning, that cares nothing for human purposes, that operates according to laws that are indifferent to whether anyone suffers or flourishes. And the indifference is what modern consciousness must confront, must live with, must somehow survive, and the survival is difficult, is producing the crisis that thinkers have been naming for centuries. The meaning crisis, the disenchantment, the death of God that Nietzsche announced not as celebration, but as diagnosis, as the recognition that the framework had collapsed, that the stories no longer worked, that the gods were no longer believable. And the unbelievability was not failure of faith, but was the inevitable result of knowledge, of the scientific worldview that explained through mechanism what had been explained through purpose, that showed causes where there had been reasons, that revealed the universe to be vast and old and empty of anything like human meaning. And the emptiness is what modern consciousness inherits, is the vacuum that religion once filled, is the absence that creates the crisis, because humans need meaning, are built to seek it, are suffering without it, are experiencing the pointlessness as pathology, as depression, as the epidemic of despair that characterizes wealthy secular societies, where material needs are met but existential needs are not, where comfort is abundant but purpose is absent, where life is long but feels empty, and the emptiness is not new, but the awareness of it is new, is the result of losing the stories that made the emptiness tolerable, that covered it over, that provided the illusion of significance. An illusion is what the religious frameworks were, but they were functional illusions, were useful fictions, were false but necessary, and the necessity is what modernity has trouble acknowledging, has trouble accepting, because modernity is committed to truth, to science, to the rejection of comfortable lies, but the rejection has costs, is leaving people without the resources to make sense of existence, without the narratives that make suffering meaningful, without the structures that provide purpose. And purpose cannot be manufactured, cannot be created through individual will, cannot be generated by deciding to care about something, because caring requires reasons, and reasons require frameworks, and frameworks are inherited, not invented, are received, not constructed, are given by cultures, by traditions, by the accumulated wisdom of generations who faced the same emptiness and created stories to fill it. And the stories worked not because they were true, but because they were shared, were collective, were providing roles and meanings that were recognized by others, that were part of a social world where purpose was public, was confirmed, was real in the way that social facts are real. And social facts require agreement, require participation, require that people act as if the meaning is there, and the as if is what modernity has trouble with, is what secular consciousness resists, because acting as if seems like pretending, seems like bad faith, seems like the self-deception that Sartre warned against. And so modern individuals are caught between the need for meaning and the inability to believe in the sources of meaning, between the hunger for purpose and the knowledge that purpose is not inherent but is imposed, is constructed, is chosen. And chosen meaning feels arbitrary, feels thin, feels like it could be otherwise, and therefore feels like it is not really meaning at all, but is just preference, just a subjective valuing that has no grounding, no justification, no claim to be anything more than personal taste. And taste is not enough, is not providing the weight that meaning requires, is not making life feel significant, is not answering the question of why any of this matters. And the why is the question that modernity cannot answer, is the question that haunts secular consciousness, is the question that produces the crisis. And the crisis is not just intellectual, but is visceral, is felt, is experienced as the flatness of existence, as the sense that nothing really matters, that everything is permitted because nothing is forbidden, that values are just opinions, and opinions are just brain states, and brain states are just physics. And the physics is indifferent, is not caring, is not providing any reason to do anything, to be anything, to continue existing. And the continuing is what becomes questionable, is what the meaning crisis threatens, is why suicide rates rise, why despair spreads, why affluent societies are seeing increases in deaths of despair, in overdoses, in suicides, in all the ways that people exit when existence feels unbearable. And the unbearable is not material, but is existential, is not about lacking things, but about lacking reasons, lacking purposes, lacking the framework that makes effort meaningful, that makes suffering tolerable, that makes life worth living. And the worth is what is missing, is what cannot be found, is what modernity has destroyed without replacing. And the replacements that have been tried are failing, are not working, are revealing themselves to be inadequate substitutes for what was lost. And what was lost was not just belief in God, but was the entire worldview that made God plausible, that made divine purpose conceivable, that made cosmic meaning possible. And the possible is what has been eliminated, is what science has shown to be projection, to be anthropomorphism, to be the mistaken attribution of human qualities to the universe. And the mistake is understandable, is natural, is the way that consciousness makes sense of the world. But it is still mistake, is still error, is still something that cannot be sustained once knowledge advances, once the mechanisms are understood, once the causes are revealed and the revealing is irreversible, is not allowing return to innocence, is not permitting the restoration of belief, is creating the permanent condition of disenchantment, of knowing that the meanings are not discovered but are created, are not inherent but are imposed, and the imposed cannot carry the weight that the discovered could carry, cannot provide the grounding that the inherent provided, cannot make life feel significant in the way that cosmic purpose made it feel significant. And so modernity is searching, is trying to find secular substitutes, is trying to create meanings that do not depend on the supernatural, on the transcendent, on the stories that are no longer believable. And the substitutes that are tried are varied, are including humanism, the belief that human values are sufficient, that human flourishing is purpose enough, that making life better for people is meaning enough. But humanism is thin, is not providing the depth that religious meaning provided, is not explaining why human flourishing matters, is not grounding value in anything beyond human preference. And preference is not enough, is not answering the question of why this preference rather than another. Why care about flourishing rather than about something else? And the something else is always available, is always an option, and without grounding, the choice feels arbitrary, feels like it could be different, and what can be different feels less real, less binding, less meaningful. And so humanism satisfies some, but not others, works for those who do not need deep grounding, but does not work for those who do, who need reasons that extend beyond the human, beyond the contingent, beyond the arbitrary. And these people are searching, are trying other substitutes, are trying nationalism, the belief that the nation provides purpose, that serving the collective gives life meaning, that sacrifice for the group is the answer. But nationalism is dangerous, is leading to conflict, is producing the us versus them that justifies violence, that makes the other into enemy, that converts the search for meaning into the justification for harm, and the harm is what makes nationalism unsustainable, as meaning is what reveals it to be destructive, to be the kind of substitute that is worse than the absence it is trying to fill. And so nationalism is rejected by many, is seen as the wrong answer, but the rejection leaves the question open, leaves the search continuing, and another substitute that is tried is ideology, the belief that political movements provide purpose, that working for justice or equality or liberation gives life meaning. That commitment to the cause is the answer, and for some this works, is providing the structure that was lost, is giving roles and purposes, and the sense of being part of something larger, something important, something that justifies effort and sacrifice. But ideology is also dangerous, is also producing conflict, is also dividing the world into believers and heretics, is creating the certainty that is intolerant, that is unwilling to coexist with doubt. And the doubt is what ideology cannot tolerate, is what it must suppress. And the suppression is violence, is coercion, is the same problem that religion had, that any totalizing meaning system has, which is that it cannot allow alternatives, cannot permit questioning, cannot coexist with the plurality that modernity also values, and so ideology is failing as substitute, is producing as much harm as good, is not solving the meaning crisis, but is creating new problems, new conflicts, new reasons for despair, and the despair is what remains, is what continues, is what characterizes modern consciousness, when all the substitutes are tried and found wanting, when the search for meaning exhausts itself, when the recognition arrives that maybe meaning cannot be found, cannot be manufactured, cannot be created through individual or collective will, because meaning was never something that humans made, but was something they received, was given by frameworks that emerged over centuries, that were refined through generations, that worked because they were inherited, not because they were chosen, and choosing meaning is the modern problem, is the thing that modernity demands, but that consciousness cannot do, because choice requires reasons, and reasons require grounding, and grounding is what is missing, is what was lost with the death of God, with the collapse of cosmic purpose, with the recognition that the universe is indifferent, and the indifference is the truth, is what science reveals, is what honesty requires accepting, and the acceptance is what some philosophers advocate, is what Camus called absurdism, is the response that acknowledges the meaninglessness while refusing to be destroyed by it, that confronts the absurd without fleeing into suicide or into false hope, that lives with full awareness of the void while continuing to live, while continuing to act, while continuing to find moments of joy and connection and beauty, even though none of it means anything in the cosmic sense. None of it matters beyond the moment, none of it will be remembered once consciousness ends, and the ending is inevitable, is coming for everyone, is the final proof that nothing matters, that all effort is futile, that existence is temporary and meaning is impossible. And yet the absurd response is to continue anyway, is to rebel against the meaninglessness, not by denying it, but by living in spite of it, by affirming life without justification, by finding satisfaction in the act of living itself, rather than in any purpose that living serves. And the serving is what is abandoned, is what the absurd lets go of, is what is recognized as impossible. And the impossible is what modernity must accept, must live with, must somehow survive. And the survival is not guaranteed, is not easy, is requiring a transformation of consciousness, a new way of being human that does not need cosmic meaning, that does not require divine purpose, that can tolerate the void without filling it, that can live with the knowledge that existence is contingent, that meaning is constructed, that everything could be otherwise. And the otherwise is what makes nothing necessary, nothing absolute, nothing secure, and the insecurity is the permanent condition, is what modernity offers, is what the horizon of meaning looks like when the horizon keeps receding, when the destination is revealed to be illusion, when the search is recognized as endless because there is nothing to find, no meaning to discover, no purpose to uncover, only the void, only the emptiness, only the silence of the universe that does not answer, that does not care, that does not provide what humans need. And the need is real, is not going away, is producing the crisis that may not have solution, that may be the permanent condition of secular consciousness, of enlightened awareness, of the knowledge that liberates from illusion, but enslaves to despair. And the despair is what remains, is what continues, is what characterizes the horizon of meaning in modernity. The flat landscape where purposes used to stand, where gods used to reign, where cosmic order used to justify suffering, and now there is nothing, or there is only what can be constructed, what can be chosen, what can be performed, and the performance feels hollow, feels fake, feels like going through motions, without conviction, and conviction is what is missing, is what cannot be manufactured, is what made religious meaning work, and without it the secular substitutes fail. The humanisms and nationalisms and ideologies all fail because they lack the weight, lack the depth, lack the grounding that conviction requires, and the requires is what consciousness needs, is what makes meaning meaning rather than just preference. And preference is not enough, has never been enough, will never be enough, because humans are built for meaning, are requiring it, are suffering without it. And the suffering is the crisis, is the modern condition, is the permanent state of existence at the horizon of meaning, where the horizon is empty, is revealing nothing, is offering nothing except the recognition that meaning was always illusion, was always projection, was always the human need imposed onto a universe that provides nothing, that offers nothing, that is indifferent to whether anyone finds meaning or drowns in meaninglessness. And the drowning is happening, is visible, is the epidemic of despair, is the meaning crisis that modernity cannot solve, because the solution would require believing what cannot be believed, accepting what knowledge has revealed to be false, returning to illusions that have been seen through. And the seeing through is irreversible, is permanent, is leaving consciousness stranded at the horizon of meaning, where the horizon extends forever and reveals nothing, where the search continues because it must, but where nothing is found because nothing is there, because meaning is not discovered but was always created, was always the story that consciousness told itself, and the story has ended, has been revealed as story, and what remains is the silence, the emptiness, the void that religions were covering, that purposes were filling, that cosmic orders were organizing, and the organizing is gone, is lost, is leaving consciousness alone with existence, with the fact of being without the reason for being, with life without purpose, with experience without significance, and the without is the horizon, is what modernity sees when it looks for meaning, and the looking continues, must continue, because consciousness cannot stop seeking what it needs. But the seeking finds nothing, reveals nothing, discovers nothing except the fact that there is nothing to discover, that the horizon is empty, that meaning is absent, that purpose is impossible, and the impossible is what must be lived with, must be endured, must be survived, and the survival is what absurdism attempts, what Camus offered, what some find sufficient, but many do not. Many cannot. Many are destroyed by the emptiness, by the meaninglessness, by the recognition that nothing matters and nothing can be done to make it matter. And the cannot is the tragedy, is the modern condition, is the permanent crisis at the horizon of meaning, where meaning has ended, where purpose has collapsed, where existence continues but significance does not, and the does not is what remains, is what persists, is what characterizes life at the horizon, where the horizon is empty, where the search reveals nothing, where consciousness is alone with its need for meaning in a universe that provides none, that offers none, that will never provide any, because meaning is not there, was never there, is only here in consciousness, in the stories that are told, in the illusions that are maintained, and the maintaining is what modernity cannot do, is what knowledge prevents, is what honesty forbids, and so the crisis continues, the despair persists, the horizon remains empty, and consciousness must somehow survive, must somehow continue, must somehow live without meaning, without purpose, without the grounding that makes existence bearable, and the bearable becomes questionable, becomes doubtful, becomes the thing that many cannot achieve, and the achieving is the challenge, is the task, is what modernity demands without providing resources, without offering solutions, without giving answers, because there are no answers, there is no solution, there is only the void, only the emptiness, only the silence, and the silence is what speaks, is what reveals, is what remains at the horizon of meaning where meaning has ended, and nothing has replaced it, and nothing ever will. Time feels like a river flowing in one direction, from past through present toward future, and this feeling is so fundamental to human experience that questioning it seems absurd, seems like denying gravity or claiming water flows upward. But the feeling of time's flow is not a direct perception of reality, but a construction, a story. The brain tells about the relationship between events, and when physicists examine the universe at its most fundamental level, they find no flow, no arrow, no distinction between past and future written into the equations, find only a four-dimensional block where all moments exist simultaneously, where what humans call past and what they call future are just directions in space-time no different than up and down, and this creates a profound puzzle, a gap between how time appears in experience and how it exists in reality, between the subjective sense of moving through time and the objective structure that contains no movement, only arrangement, only the geometry of causation. And this gap suggests that the experience of time is not a feature of the universe, but a feature of consciousness. Not something discovered, but something manufactured, and understanding how this manufacturing happens, how the brain constructs the illusion of flow from raw sensory data and memory and anticipation, reveals something strange about what humans are, about how awareness works, about the mechanisms that create the sense of being a continuous self moving through a series of moments, rather than what might actually be the case, which is that there is no continuous self, and there are no discrete moments, but only patterns of neural activity that interpret themselves as experiencing time, when really they are just responding to change, just processing difference, just comparing present states with stored representations of past states, and calling that comparison memory, calling that experience history, calling that sensation the passage of time. But the passage is metaphor, is language, trying to capture something that has no literal motion, no actual flow, because nothing is passing, nothing is moving. There is only the fact of change, the fact that one configuration of matter gives way, to another configuration, and the brain, being a system that persists across configurations, that maintains some continuity of structure even as its content shifts, interprets this persistence as duration, as a self that endures, as an identity that travels from then to now. But the travelling is illusion. The self at each moment is different from the self at every other moment, shares some patterns, some connections, some information, but is not the same thing, is not a substance that moves but a process that recurs. And what is called the experience of time is really the experience of this process recognizing its own recurrence, noticing that the current pattern resembles previous patterns, that there is continuity even though there is no identity, that memory creates the appearance of a past that the present self once inhabited, when really the past exists only as traces, as modifications to neural structure, as information encoded in synaptic weights. And these traces are not recordings, are not faithful representations, are reconstructions, are guesses about what must have happened based on fragmentary evidence. And every time a memory is recalled, it is reconstructed slightly differently, is altered by the present context, by current beliefs, by subsequent experiences, and so the past is not fixed, is not a stable foundation upon which the present stands, but is constantly being rewritten, constantly being adjusted to fit the story. The brain is telling about who it is and how it got here, and this means that personal history is fiction, not in the sense of being deliberately false, but in the sense of being narrative, being shaped by the requirements of coherence and meaning, rather than by pure correspondence to what actually occurred. And what actually occurred is anyway inaccessible, is gone. It exists only in the present, in the form of these unreliable traces that claim to point backward, but really only point to themselves, only demonstrate that something happened without being able to show exactly what. And the brain fills in the gaps, invents details, smooths over inconsistencies, creates a past that makes sense of the present, even if that past never happened quite the way it is remembered. And people are completely unaware of this invention, completely convinced that memory is retrieval, that remembering is like playing back a recording, when really it is more like improvising a story based on a few key words, more like confabulation than documentation, and the implications are vertiginous, because if the past is unreliable, then what is the present based on? What is the foundation of identity? If history is malleable, what does it mean to be the same person over time, if the time itself is constructed and the person at each moment is different, and the memories connecting them are fabricated? And perhaps the answer is that there is no foundation, no solid ground, no identity in the sense of something that persists unchanged, only the process of identification, the act of claiming continuity, the narrative that says, I am the one who did that, who experienced this, who will do something else tomorrow. And this narrative is not true or false, but functional, is a tool the brain uses to coordinate behavior across time, to plan, to learn, to maintain social relationships. Because others expect continuity, expect that the person they met yesterday will be recognizably the same person today. And so the brain provides that continuity, constructs that sameness, even though at the level of neurons and molecules, there is constant flux, constant replacement, constant change. Henri Bergson argued that there are two kinds of time, clock time and lived time, the abstract mathematical time of physics that divides duration into discrete instants, measurable and uniform, and the qualitative time of consciousness that cannot be divided, that is not made of moments, but is a continuous flow, an indivisible duration where past and present interpenetrate, where memory is not storage but preservation, where the whole of experience is always present, always accessible, not as separate events but as a cumulative whole. And Bergson called this duration, and he believed that science, by spatializing time, by treating it as if it were a line made of points, misses what time actually is in lived experience, misses the flow, the thickness, the way that consciousness is always multiple, always containing more than the present instant, always reaching backward into memory and forward into anticipation. And this multiplicity is what gives experience its richness. Its texture is what makes a melody more than a sequence of individual notes. Because the melody is heard as a whole, as a pattern that emerges from the relationship between notes rather than from the notes themselves. And this pattern exists only in duration, only in the continuous present that holds the past notes in memory while the current note is sounding. And without this duration, there would be no music, no meaning, no connection between moments, just isolated sensations with no relationship. And Bergson believed that the brain does not produce consciousness but limits it, filters it, reduces the totality of duration to the narrow slice that is relevant for action, for survival, for navigating the practical demands of living in a body. And what is called the present moment is really just this filtered slice, this pragmatic selection from the fullness of time and different states of consciousness. Different drugs, different practices can alter the filter, can expand the present, can make it thicker or thinner, can change how much of the past is felt to be co-present with the now. And this variability shows that the present is not a fixed instant, but a flexible window, a span that can be adjusted. And what determines the adjustment is not the external world, but the internal state. The brain's current configuration, its chemical balance, its attentional focus. And so the experience of time is not a passive registration of external temporal facts, but an active construction that varies with the observer, that is different for different species, different for different individuals, different even for the same individual in different circumstances. And this relativity of subjective time is separate from the relativity of physics, is about consciousness rather than space-time, is about how duration is experienced rather than how it is measured. And Bergson thought that science could never capture this experiential dimension, could never reduce durée to equations, because equations deal with space, and time deals with change, with becoming, with something that is not spatial and cannot be spatialized without losing its essential character. And whether Bergson was right about this is debatable. Neuroscience has made significant progress in understanding how the brain constructs temporal experience, has identified mechanisms involved in time perception, in the binding of events into sequences, in the calibration of subjective duration. But whether this understanding captures what Bergson meant by durée, whether it explains the qualitative feel of time passing, is less clear, is perhaps another instance of the explanatory gap, the hard problem of consciousness applied to temporality. The question of why there is something it is like to experience duration, rather than time just being a parameter in neural computations without any felt quality, without any phenomenology. The specious present, a term coined by William James, refers to the fact that what is experienced as now is not an instantaneous point, but a short interval, usually estimated at around 2 to 3 seconds, within which events feel simultaneous, feel co-present, and this interval is necessary for perception to work. Because if the present were truly instantaneous, if it had no duration, then there could be no perception of motion, no perception of change, no perception of anything except static snapshots, with no connection between them. And so the brain creates a window, a moving window that slides along the timeline, integrating information from the immediate past with information from the present instant. And within this window, there is no sense of before and after. Everything feels like it is happening now. And only when events fall outside the window do they become past, become memory, rather than perception. And the edges of this window are not sharp, are not clearly defined. There is a gradient where the recent past fades into history and the immediate future emerges into anticipation. And this fuzziness is why temporal order judgments are difficult, why people often cannot tell which of two closely spaced events occurred first, why the subjective sequence of events can differ from the objective sequence, and experiments show that the brain does not perceive events in the order they occur, but reorders them, retrospectively constructs a sequence that makes sense, that fits with expectations, that creates a coherent narrative, and this reordering can be demonstrated by showing people visual and auditory stimuli in close succession and asking them to judge which came first. And the answers are inconsistent, vary depending on attention, on prior exposure, on the semantic relationship between the stimuli, and what this shows is that temporal order is not given but inferred, is a conclusion the brain arrives at rather than a fact it registers, and the brain prioritizes coherence over accuracy, prefers a meaningful sequence to a faithful sequence. And this preference is not conscious, is not deliberate, is built into the perceptual mechanisms that construct experience. And so what is lived is not what happened, but what the brain decides happened. What fits the story? What makes sense in retrospect? And retrospect is the only perspective available because by the time an event is experienced, it is already past, is already memory. The neural processing takes time. The signal has to travel from sense organs to cortex, has to be integrated, interpreted, bound into a unified percept. And all of this happens in the past, in the few hundred milliseconds before the event enters awareness, and so consciousness is always behind, always lagging, always commenting on what has already occurred, and the sense of being present, of experiencing now, is an illusion created by the brain, backdating its own representations, stamping them with a time signature that says this is happening now, when really it happened a moment ago. And the moment ago is imperceptible, is hidden by the smoothness of the construction, by the fact that the lag is constant and so feels like zero, feels like immediacy, when really there is a gap, a delay, a space between occurrence and awareness that is filled by processing, by the mechanisms that turn raw sensation into coherent experience. And within this gap, anything can happen. Any reordering, any editing, any adjustment that makes the story work. And there is no way to catch the brain in the act. No way to compare the experience to the reality, because the experience is the only access to reality, is the only data available. And so the illusion is perfect, is undetectable from within, can only be inferred from indirect evidence, from experiments that catch the brain making mistakes, from situations where the constructed sequence contradicts the known sequence, and these situations are rare, require careful setup, because most of the time the construction is accurate enough, is close enough to the actual order of events, that no discrepancy is noticed, no problem arises, and this is what the mechanisms are optimized for. Not perfect accuracy, but sufficient accuracy, good enough to navigate the world, to avoid predators, to catch prey, to coordinate action with perception. And beyond that threshold, there is no selective pressure, no reason for the system to be more precise, and so it is not. And the sloppiness is revealed only in edge cases, only when looked for, only when the philosopher or the neuroscientist designs experiments to probe the boundaries of temporal perception and discovers that the boundaries are not where common sense suggests they should be. Memory is not storage but transformation, not preservation but reconstruction, and every act of remembering changes what is remembered, alters the trace, modifies the engram, and this modification is not corruption, is not failure, is the way memory is supposed to work, because the function of memory is not to record the past but to inform the future, to extract patterns from experience that will be useful later, to generalize, to abstract, to create rules and heuristics that apply across situations. And this requires flexibility, requires that memories be updated when new information arrives, when context changes, when the significance of an event is reinterpreted in light of subsequent experience. And so memory is always current, is always reflecting the present state of understanding. And this is why eyewitness testimony is unreliable, why people can be completely confident in memories that are completely false, why families argue about what happened because each member remembers it differently, and each is certain their version is correct, and all of them are wrong. All of them are remembering not the event, but the last time they remembered the event, and each remembering leaves a new trace, slightly different from the previous trace, and over time the memory drifts, diverges from what actually happened, and there is no original to compare it to, no master copy that remains unchanged. The first encoding is itself an interpretation, is already shaped by attention, by expectation, by emotion, by all the factors that determine what gets noticed and what gets ignored. And so from the beginning, memory is selective, is partial, is biased, and every subsequent recall adds another layer of bias, another round of reconstruction. And what remains after years is often more fiction than fact, is a story that has been told and retold so many times that it has taken on a life of its own, has become part of identity, part of the narrative of who I am and where I came from. And this narrative is precious, is defended against contradiction, is maintained even in the face of evidence, because it is not just information, is not just data, is meaning, is the framework through which life makes sense, and threatening the memory is threatening the self, is suggesting that the person is not who they think they are, that the past they rely on is unreliable, and most people cannot tolerate this suggestion, reject it, become angry, double down on their version, and this rigidity is not stubbornness, but self-protection, is the mind defending its coherence, maintaining its integrity against fragmenting forces, and the alternative, accepting that memory is unreliable, that the past is uncertain, that identity is built on sand, is too destabilizing for most, is a kind of epistemological vertigo that threatens to dissolve the ground beneath everything. And so the illusion is maintained, the confidence is preserved, the memory is trusted even though it should not be. And life continues on this foundation of useful fictions, of pragmatic falsehoods, of stories that are not true but are necessary. And perhaps truth is not the right criterion. Perhaps what matters is not whether the memory corresponds to what happened, but whether it serves the present, whether it helps navigate current challenges, whether it contributes to functioning. And by that standard, most memories are good enough, are functional, even if they are not accurate, even if they are inventions, even if the past they depict never existed except in the retrospective construction that claims to be reporting it. And this is the deepest illusion of time, not that it flows or that the present is specious or that duration is constructed, but that there is a past at all, that history is something that happened rather than something that is happening now, in the present, in the act of remembering, in the process of telling the story. And the past that is remembered is not behind, is not earlier, is right here, is present, is part of the current configuration of neural states. And saying it is past is just a way of talking about certain kinds of present states, the ones that claim to refer to earlier configurations. But the earlier configurations are gone, do not exist, cannot be accessed, and what remains is only the claim, only the reference, only the trace that says, this is a memory, this is about then, but the saying is happening now is present. And so the past collapses into the present, is revealed to be a mode of present experience rather than a separate domain. And if the past is present, then the future is too, is also a mode of current experience. The anticipation, the planning, the fear and hope and expectation that constitute futurity, and these are present states as well, are neural activity happening now, that interprets itself as being about later, but the later never comes, never is experienced, because when it arrives it is now, is present, and the present is all there ever is the only time that exists, and the flow of time from past through present to future is a story told within the eternal now, is a way of organizing experience, of making sense of change, of creating narrative continuity across discontinuous moments. But the moments are not discontinuous, are not separate because separation requires time. And time is what is being constructed, is the product, not the container, is what emerges from the activity of brains, not what brains exist within. And this inversion, this recognition that time is inside rather than outside, that temporality is a feature of consciousness rather than a feature of the universe, changes everything, makes the question not what time is but how time is made, not when things happen, but how happening is experienced, not whether the past is real, but what reality means when applied to something that exists only as a present claim about a vanished state. And these questions have no final answers, have only perspectives, only frameworks, only ways of talking that are more or less useful depending on context, depending on purpose. And the illusion of linear time is useful, is necessary for planning, for learning, for maintaining the fiction of personal identity that makes social life possible. But it is still illusion, is still construction, is still something the brain does rather than something the brain discovers. And knowing this does not make the illusion disappear, does not make time stop feeling like it flows, because the feeling is built in, is automatic, is not subject to voluntary control, but the knowing changes the relationship to the feeling, creates distance, creates perspective, makes it possible to see the machinery at work, to recognize that what feels like the fundamental structure of reality is actually the fundamental structure of experience. And experience is not reality, but a model of reality, a map, not the territory, a useful approximation that is wrong in systematic ways. And the wrongness matters when the goal is understanding rather than functioning, when the question is what time is rather than how to use it. And these questions have occupied philosophers for millennia, have generated countless theories, countless arguments, and none have settled the matter because the matter is not empirical, is not something that can be resolved by more data or better experiments, is conceptual, is about what categories to use, what framework to adopt, what language game to play, and different games give different answers. And there is no metagame from which to judge which game is correct. Only pragmatic considerations, only questions about which framework is most useful, for which purposes. And for most purposes, the folk framework is sufficient. The common sense view that time flows and the past is real, and memory is retrieval. And only when that framework breaks down, only when the contradictions become too obvious or the questions become too fundamental, is there reason to look for alternatives? To consider that maybe time does not flow, maybe the past is not real, maybe memory is not retrieval. And these maybes are not conclusions but invitations, not statements of fact but suggestions to look again, to question the obvious, to doubt the immediate, to recognize that the illusion of linear time is so convincing precisely because it is illusion, because it's made to be convincing, because that is its function, and seeing through it does not require rejecting it, does not require abandoning temporal language or pretending that past and future do not exist, only requires holding them lightly, provisionally, as useful fictions rather than ultimate truths, as tools rather than discoveries, as constructions rather than constraints. And in that lightness there is freedom. Not freedom from time, but freedom within it. Freedom to recognize that the experience is made, is chosen in some sense, even if not consciously. And what is made can be remade. What is chosen can be chosen differently. And the architecture of temporal experience, while deeply ingrained, while largely automatic, is not completely fixed, can be altered through practice, through attention, through deliberate cultivation of different modes of awareness. And these alterations do not reveal the true nature of time, but reveal that there is no true nature, no fact of the matter, only different ways of experiencing, different ways of constructing, different ways of being temporal creatures in a universe that may not be temporal at all, that may be timeless, eternal, a block, where all moments exist at once and the flow is purely in the eye of the beholder, in the structure of consciousness that moves through the block, not because the block is moving, but because consciousness is change, is process, is the activity of comparing states and calling that comparison time. And if this is right, then time is mind-dependent, is subjective in a radical sense, is not something that would exist without observers to construct it. And the universe before consciousness, before brains, was not a universe in time, but a universe of timeless physical states, of mathematical relationships, of geometry without duration, and only when matter organized itself into patterns that could represent their own history, that could compare past states with present states, did time emerge. Did temporality become a feature of the world? Not of the physical world, but of the phenomenal world. The world is experienced, and this emergence is recent, is evolutionary. Recent is less than 1 billion years old in a universe that is 14 billion years old. And for most of the universe's history, there was no time, no flow, no past or future, just configurations of matter energy, obeying laws that contain no temporal asymmetry, no preferred direction. And even now, time exists only locally, only in the small pockets of the universe, where consciousness has emerged, where nervous systems have evolved the capacity to construct temporal narratives. And the rest of the universe remains timeless, remains a four-dimensional block. And what is called the flow of time is the motion of awareness through that block. And the motion is not in the block, but in the awareness. Is a property of minds, not of space-time. And this might be the final truth about time, that it is ours, that we made it, that the illusion of linear time is not an illusion of time, but the creation of time, the bringing into being of something that would not otherwise exist. And in that creation, there is something profound, something that makes consciousness significant, not because it reveals the world, but because it transforms the world, adds temporality to what was timeless, adds meaning to what was bare fact, adds story to what was merely structure. And whether this addition is valuable, whether time is something worth creating, is a question each moment must answer for itself, right here in this specious present that claims to be flowing but is really just being, just the fact of awareness watching itself and calling that watching time.